Students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Before we begin, please have your Unit 2 vocab sheet and handout 2.4 open. You're going to be taking notes in both of these documents. Please now pause the video and take a minute to open both of them before you continue. And here are your objectives. Pause the video again, look them over, and get ready to copy some vocab and take some notes. Also, make sure that you have your vocab sheet and handout 2.4 open before you continue. Let's review a few terms on your vocab sheet. You've been learning about the Constitutional Convention of 1787. That's when delegates met in Philadelphia to create a constitution that could replace the Articles of Confederation. The goal of the convention was ratification, getting enough delegates to vote in favor of the new document. And in order to reach the agreement, several compromises were made that would have huge consequences for the future of the country. The impacts of these compromises are still with us today. Yesterday, you learned about the first compromise, which is called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise resolved a disagreement about the representation of states in Congress. Small states wanted equal representation, while big states wanted proportional representation. And that compromise created a bicameral legislature, which included the Senate and the House of Representatives. Now take a look at your handout and take a moment to fill it in. The second compromise is called the 3/5 Compromise, and it also deals with the idea of representation in Congress. It's about the representation of slaves. You saw how the Great Compromise said that a state's representation in the House of Representatives was based on its population. The question was, did a state's population include its slaves? The two groups that disagreed here were the southern states and the northern states. The southern states had thousands and thousands of slaves, and they wanted to be able to count all of them for purposes of representation. Remember, more representatives equals more power. So the more people the southern states could include in their populations, the more votes they would get in the House of Representatives. The northern states said no. None of the slaves should be counted for representation. Depending on the state, the northern states had few or no slaves. So counting the slaves wouldn't give them much extra voting power. Northern states were beginning to develop an industrial rather than an agriculture-based economy, and they did not want to see the country's government dominated by the interests of southern slave owners. So they were not about to give Southerners an advantage in the House. The compromise that the Northerners and Southern states reached is called the 3/5 Compromise because they agreed to count 3 out of every 5 slaves in the census. That means that for every 5 slaves in a state, 3 would be counted for purposes of representation in the House. Take a minute to fill out your chart. Now look at this image. It helps me visualize what I just said. Every 5 slaves counted the same as 3 free people. Think about the meaning of this incredibly racist and hypocritical compromise. Slaves had absolutely no political rights, and they definitely could not vote for a representative in Congress. Yet, they were counted in a state's population as if they did have those rights. This was a legal trick meant to benefit the people who were profiting from slavery, and it was agreed to by delegates from both the North and the South. The 3/5 Compromise helped the southern states increase their power in Congress, which they then used to maintain the institution of slavery for another 75 years. That's all for today's lesson. Pause the video and review these objectives. Take notes on loose leaf so that you have a reference for tomorrow's Do Now. And if you don't know the answer to any, just rewind the video and review. See you in class.